of Bigyan Onnesha. Today we have with us eminent scientist Dr. Monojit Debnath, additional professor, Department of Human Genetics and adjunct faculty, Department of Clinical Neurosciences, National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, that is known as NIMHANS, Bangalore. Dr. Debnath will deliver the lecture on the topic Human Intelligence, a Genetic Affair. Before starting the lecture, now I am requesting Project Coordinator of North Bengal Science Center, Shri Ritobroto Biswas, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Mr. Kundu. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. So, as has been pointed out by my learned colleague, that today is the third episode of our new webinar series titled Bigyan Onnesha, which is an initiative on part of North Bengal Science Center to connect students with scientists in this pandemic condition, so that students can have an idea regarding the different paradigms of researches that are presently being carried out throughout the world. And I am very happy and grateful to welcome Dr. Monojit Debnath from National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, popularly known as NIMHANS, which is in Bangalore. It's an institute of national importance which deals with several kinds of diseases, principally the neurological diseases. But before we let Mr. Dr. Debnath to start his talk on today's topic, Human Intelligence, a Genetic Affair, it is our duty to introduce Dr. Monojit Debnath to this esteemed gathering. We also have with us my professor and also Dr. Debnath's professor, Professor Taposh Kumar Choudhury. I welcome you, sir. And it's a privilege for us that you have joined this session. I welcome you as well on part of North Bengal Science Center, along with all our esteemed guests and student participants who have joined us. Thank you, sir, who have joined us to make this program possible. This program is being held on the Google Meet platform virtually, and it is also being live streamed on our official Facebook page, and it will be saved on that page. So if you find any kind of technical glitches, you can always view this webinar at a later time of your choosing. It will be on our Facebook page of North Bengal Science Center. As has been introduced by my colleague, Mr. Kundu, Dr. Debnath is currently working as an additional professor in the Department of Human Genetics. He is also the adjunct professor of Department of Clinical Neurosciences in NIMHANS at Bangalore. Dr. Debnath is from North Bengal, and he did his PhD from the University of North Bengal. And I had the privilege to go through his notes, which helped me immensely to pass my master's. Thank you, Dada, for giving us time. He worked as a postdoctoral fellow in the year 2005 in the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Following this, he worked as a scientist at the National Institute of Biologicals at Noida for 2 years. He then pursued postdoctoral studies again in the Nobel laureate Jean Dossé lab at Paris. He joined NIMHANS in 2012 in the Department of Human Genetics. He has been awarded several prizes as well. He was awarded the gold medal for securing first position in Masters from the University of North Bengal. He was also awarded with 2 Young Scientist Awards, including Sudev Bhushan Ghosh Young Scientist Award in 2003. And in 2006, he received the First Grade Research Grant Award from China Postdoctoral Science Foundation. He has received a Center for Excellence in Science, Engineering and Medicine Grant Award in 2019 from Department of IT, BT and ST, Government of Karnataka as well. His current focus or his research of interest includes genetical understanding of the nervous system and several disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, autism, major depressive disorder, and peripheral neuropathies. So we felt inviting a scientist of such repute and renown to this platform of Bigyan Onnesha, particularly in this juncture when we are in a pandemic and most of the psychologists are of the opinion that different kind of depressive disorders are particularly being noticed in young age group students who are confined and are forced to take up their classes online, and in many cases they even can't attend that. So not going to school, not going to colleges, not going to universities, attending regular classes has brought one or the other kind of anxiety, and in many cases depressive disorders are also being reported in young uh, school going students, college students as well. So we felt that if a scientist who works in this field, he comes and gives his precious time, and this platform will also give the student community to interact, to ask questions at the end of this session. So this will achieve our goal, our mandate with which we have organized this webinar. This is our third episode. Besides his research, he also guides PhD students and DM neurology, DM addiction medicine theses as well. Dr. Debnath is on the editorial board and is a reviewer of several national and international journals as well. If I go on speaking about his achievements, it will take up all the time. So I don't think students or participants are finding it interesting to listen to me for such an extended time. So now may I request Dr. Manojit Debnath from Nimhans, Bangalore to please start your talk on today's topic. And I once again welcome you and thank you on behalf of North Bengal Science Center, Shiliguri, for giving us time in this pandemic situation to connect with the students amidst your busy schedule. And I wish that this webinar today will open a new uh, a new horizon for the participants, a new field of sciences, and to the participants, I would say, please have your patience, listen to to our guest scientist of today, and at the end, you can always ask the questions directly by unmuting yourself, or you can also ask the question in the chat box of this Meet platform. Thank you all. I once again welcome you all. Manojitda, the floor is all yours, or should I say the web is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all your kind words. Yeah, just give me 1 minute so that I can switch over to PPT. Can you see my PPT? Brother, can you see my PPT? Yes. Okay.
No, sir, not yet.
Okay. I'm trying to fix it. Just give me 1 minute. Yes. Yes.
দেখা যাচ্ছে নাকি পিপিটা? ওটা
It was visible.
এটাকে পিন করতে হবে। এই সেই সমস্যা তো। হ্যাঁ,
Now, can you see my PPT now?
বলো একটু বলে বলে দাও। আমি করছি। গন্ডগোল করছে, যাই করুন না সে গন্ডগোল করছে।
Yeah, this one.
Yes sir, PPT is.
You can see the PPT now?
Yes, now we can see it.
Okay.
And
Just move it. It's not moving. It's moving, right? My PPTs are moving.
no sir,
Hello. Hello. Okay. Now just share it. Just share it and open it. Okay. Just on it, I think. What is the issue? It's moving now. Share. Okay. Yeah. So can you see the PPT now?
Yes, now it is visible.
Okay, it's moving also, right?
Next slide.
Please change to the next slide.
It's not moving.
Yes.
Okay.
Slides are changing.
Okay. First, go back to the first slide. Yeah. Okay. Sorry for this technical glitch. Okay. So thank you so much for all your kind words, Mr. Ritobata Vishwas, the program coordinator of North Bengal Science Center, Mr. Vishwajit Kundu, the education officer of North Bengal Science Center, professors, teachers, faculty members of different academic institutions, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen, namaskar and a very good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, let me take this opportunity to thank the organizing team, especially Mr. Ritobata Vishwas, for inviting me to deliver a talk in this Vigyan Anwesha initiative of North Bengal Science Center. So today, the topic of my discussion is, please next slide. The topic of my discussion is human intelligence, a genetic affair. I was told that this is an extremely heterogeneous audience, and it has been a challenging task for me to put the facts in a simple way. But I promise that I will lecture as simple as possible. My dear students, today I am going to talk on the most complex characteristic or phenomenon of this universe. In fact, human intelligence has been a mysterious aspect of human life for centuries. Understanding of the biological construct of human intelligence has been a subject of intense debate, intense research, and a daunting task to the scientist for a century now. Well, I am not here to talk about all the facets of human intelligence, but definitely I'll make an attempt to give you some insights on the genetic basis of human intelligence. Yeah, next slide, please. Okay, so I think all of you know that genetic per se is a very... So before I talk about the genetic architecture of human intelligence, it is essential to understand the fundamentals of human genetics. I think all of you know that in Mahabharata, when Kurukshetra war was about to begin, Arjun, after seeing Guru Dronacharya, Pitamaha Bhishma, and Kulguru Kripacharya on side, he decided not to take part in the Kurukshetra war. Then Lord Krishna had to intervene. He had to conduct a Vishwarup Darshan to convince Arjun to participate in the Kurukshetra war. So similarly, if you want to understand the genetic basis of human intelligence, a Vishwarup Darshan of human genetic has to be conducted. So before I take you through the Vishwarup Darshan of human genetics, let us start this lecture on a lighter note. So first question is, what is life? I'm sure that all of you know what is life. And I'm sure that all of you will define life in different ways. Life has been defined in different ways. In fact, there are more than 100 definitions of life. So Indian story. The story is on 6 blind men and an elephant. So 6 blind men were asked to define an elephant. The person who touched the tail of the elephant, he thought elephant is a rope-like structure. The one who touched the body of the elephant, he thought elephant is a wall-like structure. The one who touched the ear of the elephant, he thought elephant is a fan-like structure. And the one who touched the trunk of the elephant, he thought elephant is a snake-like structure. And the one who touched the tusk of the elephant, he thought elephant is a spear-like structure. Similarly, the definitions of life put forwarded by different people at different time were inadequate. I would not say inaccurate, but were inadequate. Next slide, please. So here I have my own definition of life. So I say life is nothing but a DNA or gene-centric phenomena or process. I would give you enough justification towards my definition of life. Look at the picture on the left panel. Okay, right from the zygote to the full-grown embryo, all the biological processes that were involved in the growth and differentiation of the embryo, everything is controlled by gene. Look at the right-hand side panel. The function, the biological homeostasis of each and every cell, each and every organ, and each and every tissue is controlled by gene. Not only that, next one please. All the phenotypic characteristics, whatever you can quantify, whatever you can see, for example, the pattern of the hair, the color of the eyes, the height of an individual, everything is controlled by gene. Not only that, what about human qualities? Next slide, please. Let us talk about behavior, be it normal behavior, be it aggressive behavior. Earlier, people used to think that the size of the brain contribute to the aggressive behavior. The size, the level of different neurotransmitter also make a contribution to aggressive behavior. But now, in the post-genomic era, people have found that genes have substantial contribution to the aggressive behavior. For example, if you have this, there is one gene. The name of the gene is MAO-A. So that is monoamine oxidase A. This gene is involved in monoamine neurotransmitter metabolism. So if you have low level of this enzyme, then people tend to develop violent behavior. On the other hand, if you have high level of this enzyme, that is MAO-A, so people tend to have a pleasant personality. So apart from this, there is another gene that is CDH12, previous one, CDH12. That gene, a variant of that gene has been associated with behavior. Next one, please. So this is all about the genetic influence on behavior, aggressive behavior. Now let us talk about the impact of gene on another human quality, that is sleep. Okay, so the quantity and quality of sleep both are indeed influenced or affected by genes. So there are two studies. In one study, it was found that if you have one version of the gene, the name of the gene is ABCC9. So this gene is present on chromosome number 12. If you have a version of the gene, one version of the gene, you have to sleep for 7 to 8 hours to be fit and fine. Whereas the people having another version of the same gene, they can do good, they can do well by sleeping only 4 hours. So that is the duration of the sleep. In another study, a group of people, previous one please, a group of people who were subjected to 8 hours of a sleep, that is sufficient sleep, for a duration of 1 week, and there was another comparative group where people had insufficient sleep. That is, they were allowed to sleep only for 5 hours. So you have two groups, 8 hours and 5 hours. So after 1 week, it was found that people who had insufficient sleep, as many as 711 genes, expression of 711 genes were affected. Now you will ask me the questions, what are those genes? So basically the genes which are involved in circadian pathway, which are involved in sleep homeostasis, the gene involved in metabolism or oxidative stress, these genes were affected by insufficient sleep. So genes affect your quantity as well as quality of the sleep. Next, now what about the speech and language? Okay, see this picture, chimpanzee, they are our closest relatives. We have 99% genetic similarity. So despite having 99% genetic similarity, they are not able to talk. So they do not have speech and language skill. So the reason behind this is genetic contribution. There is a gene, the name of the gene is FOXP2. This gene is the principal determinant of speech and language. And we have a version of the gene that helps in the development of speech and language, while a chimpanzee has another version of that gene. Okay, so it doesn't have the ability of speech and language. Okay, so we have talked about behavior, we have talked about sleep, we have talked about speech and language. Now, what about human intelligence? Next one, please. Yeah, human intelligence is also, of course, influenced by gene. But I will be coming back to this point, the influence of gene on human intelligence. But before that, I want to say that your whole life is, in fact, controlled by gene. That's why I say life is nothing but a DNA-centric phenomena. That is fine. Your whole life is controlled by gene. But what about your destiny? Are the genes the destiny? Okay. We'll try to address this question a few minutes later. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, Theoretically, it should be, because human genome is the book of our life, and you need to keep on reading book in your whole life. Okay, so just imagine if there is a printer's devil, if there is a typological error in this book of life, then this book of life can turn out to be a monster for you. But don't worry, we can rewrite this book to some extent, we can edit this book to some extent, and then again you can swing back to the music of life. Next one, please. Yeah, dear students, so learning becomes very interesting when there is a bi-directional interaction between teacher and student. So let us make this an interactive session. So I would keep on asking questions. You have to quickly unmute and answer those questions. So before we talk about the genetic influence or genetic determinants of intelligence, so first we have to know how many genes we have. So how many genes? Do you know how many genes we have? Anyone? Okay, next one, please. Yeah, so look at this picture. 50 years back, around 1970, we used to think that we have 1.1 lakh to 2 lakhs genes. But in the year 1990, a project was initiated. That was one of the largest project in in any branch of the sciences. So that project was Human Genome Project. So that was initiated in 1990. So the main objective of that project was to sequence nucleotides in our genome, and then to identify the number of genes that we have. Okay, so by 1990, the Human Genome Project was started. 1970 to 2001, so the number of genes came down drastically. When the first draft of Human Genome was ready by 2001, then we had an estimate of total number of genes is about 30 to 35,000. So by 2003, another version of the Human Genome Project or Human Genome, draft of Human Genome was available. By that time, we used to think that we have 30,000 genes. By 2007, scientists claim that they have finished Human Genome Project. So by 2007, the total number of genes had come down to 20 to 25,000. So this is on the left side, this is the picture of 2007. My question is not about the total number of genes. By 2007, by 2010, we came to know that we have approximately 25,000 genes. But when you look at this picture, see Homo sapiens, we have 20 to 25,000 genes. But look at this, Orange sativa, that is the rice plant. The total number of genes is 50,000. Look at this, one nematode, Caenorhabditis elegans. Look at this, Arabidopsis thaliana. So total number of genes in human is almost equal to Caenorhabditis elegans or that plant Arabidopsis thaliana. Now, I have a question here. If you look at the organismal level, we are the most complex living organism because we have undergone so much of sophistication in our structure, in our network, okay, be it neural network, be it immune network or endocrine network. Now, if you talk about the cognitive ability, if you talk about the learning ability, memory, so we are the most intelligent entity in this universe. Now the question is that despite so much sophistication, despite being the most intellectual entity in the animal kingdom, why we have so less number of genes? Or in other words, why we have, how we can have so much of sophistication with such less number of genes if you compare it with the rice plant, that is almost half. Okay, next please. Yeah, let us have a look to the recent picture. As of today, 16th September, total number of genes in human in one website is 19,955. In another website, it is 20,203, right? But the total number of genes has also come down in rice. It is now 40,000, and wheat it is 95,000. Now, if you look at this, the total number of genes in Homo sapiens is approximately 20,000, And total number of gene in Caenorhabditis elegans, it is also almost 20,000. Now the question is that, what is driving this complexity? Genes are really driving this complexity or not? Yeah, we'll try to address this question. Next, please. Yeah. So the question is whether gene number is linearly associated with complexity? No, of course not. Okay, then what about the genome size? Our genome size is 3 billion. That means in haploid genome, we have 3 billion nucleotides. Look at the comparison. In Caenorhabditis elegans, the size of Caenorhabditis elegans is only 1 millimeter. Okay, it is a nematode worm. The genome size of Caenorhabditis elegans is only 100 million. They have 100 million nucleotides. So genome size does not play any role in biological complexity. Then what about the numbers of cell types and organ structure? If you look at the Caenorhabditis elegans, they have approximately 1100 somatic cells and almost double, that is almost 2000 germ cells. And how many cells we have? We have trillions of cells. So the number of cells also do not play any role in complexity. Then what about the diversity? For example, we have the most complex, most sophisticated neural system, we have immune system, endocrine system, circulatory system. All these system, networking system are very, very sophisticated. Whereas in Caenorhabditis elegans, they are not so well developed. So diversity of functional repertoire doesn't play important role in biological complexity, maybe to some extent. Then what about the intricate developmental processes? We take approximately 37 weeks to complete the developmental process, whereas Caenorhabditis elegans take only 2.5 to 4 days. So it doesn't play important role in genomic biological complexity. Then what about cultural evolution? Maybe to some extent, but the real answer is hidden in your genetic architecture. Okay? Can anyone of you tell me what is that answer? How we can have so much of sophistication with so less number of genes? Anyone of you? Do you know the answer? Okay. So if you do not know the answer, students, you have to wait for another few minutes. Okay? Next, please. Yeah. So my next question is, what is gene? Because there are severe cracks in gene concept. So it's like a challenge. Whatever you tell me, whatever definition you tell me about the gene, I would say all these are wrong. Because there are many misconceptions about the definition of the gene. So let us try to understand what is the proper definition of gene. Next one, please. Okay. For those who do not know what is gene, who do not understand what is gene, I'll just give you one crude example. I always compare our gene with a library. So in the library, you have a building. So a human, our body is just like the building. Within the library, you have the racks, book racks. So within our body, we have cell and nucleus. Within the racks, you have books. So books are nothing but our chromosome, our genome. So within the books, you have pages, lines, pages. So those pages are nothing but your DNA. Within the pages, you have line or sentences. So those sentences are nothing but gene. And within sentences, you have words. And within gene, you have ABGC, alphabets or letters. So if you want to say, what is the definition of the gene? So you have to say, gene is something that makes some meaning. Okay? So like words in a book, each and every word will have a meaning. So gene will also have a meaning in life. Okay. Now, if you ask me, how does gene look like? It's very difficult, red or white or green. Okay. But what you see in book, okay. So you see chromosome at metaphase stage. Just look at the right hand side. So that structure actually is a metaphase chromosome, what you see in the book. But inside the cell, in the chromosome, the cells which are not dividing, interphase stage, the chromosome or DNA, they will be like noodle-like structure. Okay. So did you ever ask yourself, what would be the length of these noodles within your cell? Okay, it's very astonishing. Next one, please. See, human genome, I'm talking about diploid cells. We have, in haploid cells, I told 3 billion. In diploid cell, it is 6 billion. Okay. Now, what is the size of one nucleotide? So it is 6 billion base pair, 6 billion nucleotide into 0.34 nanometer. So the size of DNA in one cell is equal to 2 meter. So you have 2 meter long DNA in your one cell. Now, do you know what is the size of a nucleus? The diameter of a nucleus is only 5 to 10 micrometer. Now just think how 2 meter long DNA is accommodated within 5 to 10 micrometer nucleus. Forget about that. Now think about your whole body. Okay, so if you want to know the length of total DNA in your whole body, you'll be really length of your total DNA. So length of one base pair is 0.34 into 10 to the power, the second last line. So length of one base is 0.3 into 10 to the power minus 9 meter. I have converted nanometer into meter. And how many base pair you have per cell? You have 6 into 10 to the power 9, 6 billion nucleotides. And how many cells we have in our body? Approximately 10 to the power 13. Okay. Now if you convert this, it becomes 2.0 into 10 to the power 13 meters. So if you convert this into astronomical units, it becomes 133.69 astronomical units. Just imagine, you can go to sun and come back to earth and you can make 70 trips. So that is the length of the DNA you have in your body. You can make 70 trips between sun and earth. Next one, please. Okay, now again coming back to the definition of gene. For common people, I would say that gene is a segment that produces protein. But for the student of science, the definition would be different. As I said, there are severe cracks in the definition of gene. So let us try to understand what is the correct definition of gene. Next one, please. Yeah. So the concept of gene started in 1940. Biddle and Tatum, they say gene is a segment of DNA that codes for one enzyme. Okay. But the problem is that all enzymes are protein, but all proteins are not enzyme. Okay. So this definition is not correct. Then scientists revised the definition of gene into, so gene that a segment of DNA that codes for proteins is known as a segment of DNA that codes for protein. But the problem is that in some proteins, there are 2 or 3 polypeptides. For example, polypeptide chain alpha and beta. So you can't really say gene is a segment of DNA that produces proteins. Next one, please. So that definition of gene was again revised. So people then started saying gene is a segment of DNA that code for polypeptide chain. So one gene, one polypeptide relationship. But the problem is that there are some genes which do not code for a series of polypeptide chain. They code for ribosomal RNA or tRNA, transfer RNA. So you can't say gene is a segment of DNA then that codes for polypeptide chain. So that is not a complete definition of gene. Next one. Then in 1957, Seymour Benzer, he thought that I would give the most modern and most modern definition of gene. He said gene is a segment of DNA that acts as unit of transmission, that is cistron. Gene is a unit of combination or unit of recon, and gene as unit of mutation or muton. So he said gene is unit of cistron, recon, muton. Cistron is a structural part of the DNA that codes for protein. Recon is the part of the DNA that undergoes recombination, and muton means it undergoes mutation. Okay, but that definition, the definition given by Seymour Benzer is also wrong. Okay, next, please. So the definition of gene is evolving. So far we do not have a correct definition of gene. In the year 2017, Portin and Wilkins, they tried to give a decent definition of gene by incorporating all the necessary components of the gene, but it is a very complex definition of gene. So what they said, you can say gene is a segment of DNA, fine, that will code for RNA as well as polypeptide chain, and that will have direct impact, that is, they will affect the phenotypes. So this is a very good definition of gene, okay, though it is a little bit complicated. So what we will say is a segment of DNA that can code either for RNA, that can code either for proteins or polypeptide chain, and that directly affect a particular phenotype. Okay, next one. So now you know that we have 20,000 genes, and you know what is the definition of gene. Then the next question is that how do gene perform their function? Gene, they do not directly participate in the function. They participate, or they perform that genes perform their function by producing proteins. Next, please. Yeah, I think this is the central dogma of molecular biology. I'll not spend much time on this. You all know then that gene perform their function by producing polypeptide chain of proteins. So basically, what gene has to undergo its photocopy, that is called replication. So another copy of DNA will be synthesized. From DNA, we'll get mRNA. So it is known as transcription. From mRNA, we'll get the polypeptide chain. So it is known as translation. So all of you know this. Okay. The next one, please. So gene, they code for proteins. So what are the different kinds of proteins gene they produce? Some genes, they code for structural proteins. Those structural proteins will maintain your structural integrity. For example, in reptiles, they have skulls, right? So we have muscle protein, actin, myosin. We have nails, we have hairs. So a group of proteins that are known as structural proteins, they maintain the integrity of our body. So some genes, they are meant for producing structural proteins. Okay, there are another set of genes, they code for enzymes, and they catalyze all the biochemical function in your body. Okay, right from digestion of your food, any biochemical process you name are controlled by enzymes. Okay, so there are another set of genes which are known as signaling molecules, be it neurotransmitter, be it hormones, be it immune proteins. They actually carry out or help in carrying out the signaling of different biological processes. So basically, DNA produces proteins. Some of the proteins serve as structural proteins, maintain your integrity. Some of the proteins, they act as enzyme. So they help in the biochemical reactions, and some of the proteins, they act as signaling proteins. They carry out the signaling processes. Okay, next. So this is the way how gene perform their function. Now in the beginning, as I said, we have 20,000 genes. Okay, so I think you have a question that what these 20,000 genes do. So this is the estimate. See, so from these 20,000 genes, some of the genes, they code for example, structural proteins on the left side, fourth one, 280 genes, they code for structural proteins, and 961, they code for signaling molecules, right? And 1,098, they code for transporters. So this is the distribution of the function of different gene. Okay, next one, please. Now the question is that how much of our DNA, what is the percentage of our DNA that codes for protein? Okay, so it is only 1% of your DNA, okay, that codes for protein. Remaining 99%, people used to say those are junk DNA, they don't have any role, but recent research suggests that they have important role in maintaining integrity of the human genome, stability of the human genome, and also they participate in the gene regulatory network. So it is only 1% of your genome that codes for proteins. Next one, please. The next question which you may ask me that, okay, we have these 20,000 genes, whether these 20,000 genes all are similar in each one of us. Yes, all these 20,000 genes are similar in each one of us. If they are different, this will lead to different diseases. Okay. Now on the left side, you have a picture. So where it shows that we all are genetically similar by 99.9%. So there is only 0.1% difference. That each one of us are unique in our look. Okay. Then where lies the difference in our genome? So difference lies in the polymorphisms. Apart from these genes, 20,000, these are protein coding genes, there are a number of nucleotides which shows polymorphism. That means these polymorphisms are two different types. One is single nucleotide polymorphism. For example, if you have adenine, adenine can exist in one individual as adenine, in another individual as thymine, right? So that is called polymorphism. So that is called single nucleotide polymorphism. And besides single nucleotide polymorphism, you have copy number variation also. So in case of SNP, it is only single nucleotide. In case of copy number variation, it ranges from 1 kb to 100 kb. That means 1,000 base pair may be repeated again and again, or 1,000 base pair may be deleted or may be duplicated. Okay, so these regions, these polymorphic regions of our genome, we differ at those regions, only at polymorphic region like SNP and CNVs. We all do not differ in the protein coding genes. Next one, please. Okay, so here is the answer. Okay, why, despite being, so sophisticated and intellectual entity, why we have so less number of genes? Now you need to go back to your childhood. Okay, in childhood, you might have played with the puzzles. Give you same number of blocks, and if I ask you, make 3 different structures. Yes, it is possible. Using same number of blocks, you can make 3 different structures. That is the example of that wooden box. Okay, so similar principle is also applied in human. So what is the principle? Principle is that, so it is a permutation and combination. Okay, look at the picture down. So in one chromosome, you have exon, you have intron, exon, intron. So exons are the coding region of the DNA. Introns are not the coding region of the DNA. Now what you do, so you can have different combination. For example, you can just cut exon 1, exon 2, exon 6. Or you can alternatively cut exon 2, exon 3, exon 5. Or you can alternatively cut exon 3, 4, and 6. So this process is known as alternative splicing. So by this alternative splicing, from same gene, you can get different isoform. For example, this gene, this is a single gene, you are getting 3 different. Increase the coding capacity of your genome. So now you can ask me, what happens to the Caenorhabditis elegans? They also have similar number of genes. Now the difference lies here. In human, almost 94% of our genes, they undergo alternative splicing. Whereas in case of Caenorhabditis elegans, it is less than 10%. That's why their gene means one gene will produce one polypeptide chain. Okay, here in case of human, one gene can produce many different protein isoforms. Okay, so that's why with the less number of gene, we can perform many different functions. We can have diverse number of proteins, and we can perform different sophisticated function. So that is the hidden answer for biological complexity. Next one. Yeah. So the next question is then, how genes lead to a disease? Yeah. Next one. Okay. So I have tried to give you some example, like there are 5 different mechanisms through which the genes can contribute to different diseases. The first one is, we all have 46 chromosome or 23 pairs of chromosome. Just imagine if there is one less than 46, if you have 45, it leads to some diseases. If you have one more instead of 46, if you have 47, it will lead to some diseases. So first mechanism is numerical changes in chromosome number. The second mechanism is structural changes. Number will remain intact. There will be no variation of 46 chromosome number, but a part of the chromosome may be deleted, a part of the chromosome may be inserted into another chromosome. There could be translocation, there could be inversion. Those all are known as structural rearrangement or structural changes. Next one, please. Yeah, so there are some examples. For example, this is trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. 21 instead of 2, you have 3. So it leads to Down syndrome. Okay, if it is instead of 46, you have 45, it leads to Turner syndrome. Next one, please. So did you ask yourself why it happens? Why some people have one extra chromosome? Why some people have one less chromosome? The mechanism is, I think all of you are aware of cell division. In meiosis cell division, there are 2, the first one and second one. Okay, so what happens? The cell division has 4 stages, that is prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. What happens during metaphase? Chromosomes comes to the equatorial plane, and after that they split and then they move back to the poles during anaphase, and then finally they undergo cell division. What happens during metaphase stage, if the chromosome fail to separate. If the chromosome fail to separate, just have a look to the right side picture. So if the chromosome fail to separate during meiotic division, so in one gamete, 2 chromosomes will go. For example, in another gamete, there will be no chromosome. So if both the gametes are fertilized by sperm, so in one, there will be 1 extra chromosome, in another, there will be 1 less chromosome. So this is the mechanism. This mechanism is known as non-disjunction. So non-disjunction is a mechanism through which you can have numerical chromosomal abnormality. Next one. So these are structural chromosomal abnormalities. As I mentioned, it can be deletion, it can be translocation, it can be inversion, it can be ring chromosome. Next one, please. I have 2 examples of chromosomal structural aberration. So if there is a translocation between chromosome number 9 and chromosome number 22, a part of the chromosome number 9 gets separated and it attaches itself to chromosome number 22, and from 22, a segment that detaches and attaches to chromosome number 9. So this sorts of translocation leads to a type of cancer known as leukemia, chronic myelogenous leukemia, while you have excess number of lymphocytes. Okay, so on the right hand side, it is called Cry-Dushet syndrome. In chromosome number 5, if a small portion of the chromosome is deleted, so it leads to this disease. This disease is called Cry-Dushet syndrome, where the kids, they cry like cat. Okay, so numerical changes in chromosome number can lead to disease, and structural changes in chromosome number can also lead to some diseases. Next one, please. The next one is point mutation. Okay, we are talking about number of chromosome, we are talking about the structure of the chromosome. Now, forget all these, we are talking about a single nucleotide. If there is change in only one nucleotide, okay, it also can lead to a disease. Next, please. So I'll just give you one example. In case of sickle cell anemia, the red cells become sickle cell. So what happens basically, I'm not showing the entire the picture of the gene, hemoglobin gene. I'm just showing the region of the interest. See, in the wild type, it is CTT, cytosine thymine. Okay, and then corresponding mRNA, it is GAA, and then corresponding amino acid, that is glutamic acid. What happens? The T, the middle T is changed to adenine. Because of this change, your mRNA is also changed. So it is GAA in wild type, in mutated for individuals, it is GUA. And because of this single nucleotide change, amino acid is also changed. So this is an amino acid change from glutamic acid to valine. Okay, so a single nucleotide change can also lead to some diseases. It is called point mutation. Next one is quite interesting. So it is called triplet repeat expansion. There are many neurological diseases, close to 17, 18 diseases, which are caused by triplet repeat expansion. You all know that a triplet nucleotide codes for 1 amino, 3 nucleotide code for 1 amino acid. And these 3 nucleotide or triplet nucleotide, they are supposed to be present only in one dose. In some individuals, it is repeated again and again. So in case of, on the left hand side, you have Huntington disease. Okay, so in case of Huntington disease, on chromosome number 4, if CAG repeat is present more than 40 times, okay, if it is repeated 40 times, then people develop this Huntington disease. It's a neurological disorder. Okay, on the right hand side, on chromosome number X, the CGG repeat, the triplet nucleotide, if it is repeated more than 20 times or 200 times, then people develop this disease. Okay, now what kind of change is this? It's basically a mutation. Okay, so this mutation happens when there is a replication slippage or there is a problem with DNA replication. So this leads to triplet repeat expansion, and this leads to many neurological conditions. Next one, please. The last mechanism is genetic conflict. Okay, this is an entirely new concept. Okay, when during pregnancy, the developing fetus and mother, they should live in harmony. So what happens? There are conflicts. Sometimes there are conflicts, and this is because fetus has 50% DNA from the father and fetus has 50% DNA from the mother. So fetus 50% DNA, when they try to express themselves, then there is a conflict. So one crude example of genetic conflict between mother and fetus is erythroblastoma fetalis. I think all of you know that if there is an incompatibility in blood group between mother and father, then it leads to erythroblastosis fetalis. Similarly, there are upcoming research, there are emerging research that shows that that if there is genetic compatibility and incompatibility between mother and fetus, it can lead to different neuropsychiatric diseases, for example, schizophrenia and autism. Next one. So these are 5 different mechanisms through which gene or chromosome contribute to different diseases. Now, types of human genetic disorder. Why I am telling you all this? Because it is very essential to know before we talk about genetic basis of human intelligence. Next one, please. There are 2 different types of diseases. One is simple genetic disorders and complex genetic disorders. All the disorders, I mean, I don't want to classify them as simple and complex. All the disorders are important. But for the sake of understanding, I have classified them into simple genetic disorders and complex genetic disorders. Okay, so what are simple genetic disorders? Where gene directly lead to the disorder. For example, thalassemia, for example, Karl blindness, where you have a gene that directly leads to the disorder. What about the complex disorders? In complex disorders, gene do not cause the disease. Gene actually enhance the risk of the disease. If you talk about hypertension, if you talk about diabetes, if you talk about multiple sclerosis, depression, schizophrenia, all these are complex disorders. Asthma, where you cannot say, you cannot list out a single gene is causing the disease. There are multiple genes, and these genes do not directly cause the disease. They just enhance the risk of the disease. Simple disorders, actually, they are very less. Maybe you can find 1 in 1 million, for example, thalassemia. You don't find in every family, right? If you don't find in every, small villages, right? Whereas in complex disease, you will find 1 in each and every family. For example, asthma, depression, diabetes. Okay, so that is the difference between simple and complex genetic disorders. Next one, please. Okay, so simple genetic disorders, there will be 1 gene, 1 family. And if you ask me, for example, if a family member has a disease, I can really calculate the risk whether you will develop the disease or not. For example, in case of complex genetic disorders, if someone is having asthma, if someone is having depression, I cannot really tell you in the next generation whether the offspring will have asthma or depression. It is very difficult because it is polygenic. Multiple genes are involved in enhancing the risk of the complex disorders. Next one. Okay. The next question is very interesting, right? The question is that nowadays there is a tendency that if someone is having good behavior, okay, you blame it to the genes, or you call it is. If someone is coming to you with a new disease, okay, you say possibly because of genes. It may be a genetic disorders. Before you level or before you link a trait with the gene, okay, there are certain stages, there are some strategies. You can't directly say it is because of genes. You have to do some assessment. Okay, how do you say? Next one. There are 3 different approaches. You have to do all these studies before you link anything to genetics. So what do you do? First one is family studies. Okay. So whenever someone comes with a new disease or unknown disease, the clinician, they try to take the entire family history. They look for some clues whether this disease is a genetic disease or not. So what you have to do, you have to ask about the information for the entire family members. You have to check whether similar type of diseases or trait is present in multiple members of the family or not. If, for example, if someone is suffering from depression, so you have to check in all other members of the family whether they have depression or similar characteristic. If there is familial clustering of a trait, then you can say genes do play important role in this trait. Okay, but the question is that how much? You just get some indication that gene might be involved in this trait. The next question is that how much? 50% or 100%? Then you have to do twin studies and finally adoption studies. Next one. Okay, so this is an example, familial clustering. You have to draw a pedigree, 2 generation, 3 generation, 4 generation, and then you have to look for who all are suffering from the same disease. Okay, it would give you some insight about the role of the gene into that disease or into that trait. Next one is twin study. Okay, once you know then you have to do twin studies. Now, what are twin studies? Okay, so twins, basically they are identical twins or monozygotic twins, or fraternal twins or dizygotic twins. So identical twins, that is ovum is fertilized by single ovum is fertilized by single sperm, and then when it forms zygote, it divides into two different members of a pair of the twin, and they are similar genetically 100%. Whereas in case of dizygotic twins or fraternal twins, so our sperm is fertilized by ovum is fertilized by a sperm, and the second ovum is fertilized by another sperm. So you have different members. So it is not derived from the same zygote. So there, the genetic similarity will be 50%, whereas in case of identical twins, the genetic similarity is 100%. Okay, next one. So I'll give you one crude example. Okay, let us talk about intelligence. Okay, on the left hand side, monozygotic twins. Okay, so monozygotic twins means they have 100% similar DNA. Okay, and dizygotic twins, they have only 50% similar DNA. Now, if you rear these twins in case of monozygotic twins in different environment, and if the intelligence is same, then you should say it is because of genetics, and you can calculate the percentage, whether it is 50% or 100%. Okay, in case of dizygotic twins, they have different DNA, but if you allow them to live in the same environment, okay, if intelligence is same, you have to say it is because of environment. If intelligence is different, you have to say it is because of genetics. So this is the way how family and twin studies help you to understand or help you to conceptualize the genetic basis of a disease or a trait. Next one is adoption study. So what do? On the left hand side, you have biological parents. On the right hand side, you have adoptive parents. Okay, so if a child is born to the biological parents, if biological parent is absolutely fine, they don't have any disease, and you take this kid and leave him with the adoptive parents. For example, adoptive parents has depression, and if this child develops depression when he becomes adult, you should say it is because of environment. Now, if the biological parents are suffering from a disease, and if you take the child to the adoptive parents, and if you leave him with the adoptive parents, and adoptive parents do not have any disease, if the child develops the disease, then you will say it is because of gene, right? So this is the way you can dissect the role of environment and dissect the role of gene. You can calculate the percentage of the percentage of gene playing important role in the characteristic of the environment also, right? So in the beginning of any genetic studies for any diseases or any trait, you have to do family study, you have to do twin study, and you have to do adoption study. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, now the next question is, how do you find the gene? Okay, now you have 20,000 genes and you have 3 billion nucleotide. Then you have 46 chromosomes, and it is a Herculean task to find a gene that can cause a disease. Okay, the next one. So here is a picture of 46 chromosome, right? And each and every chromosome, there will be several hundred genes. Then from these several hundred genes in 46 chromosome, how do you find the gene? Next one. So there are two different approaches. First one is genetic linkage analysis, and the second one is association studies. Okay, next one. So what do you mean by linkage analysis? So linkage analysis is a kind of old concept where of genetic markers is studied in the family and it is being linked with a particular phenotype. So you just see how this phenotype is getting transmitted to the next generation and how the genetic markers are getting transmitted to the next generation. So this kind of linkage study is very old concept and it is applicable only for simple diseases or Mendelian diseases like thalassemia, hemophilia, because they run in the family. Okay, and these kind of linkage studies are of limited use for complex diseases like depression, schizophrenia, autism, etc. Okay, the next approach is association study. Now, if I ask you, okay, you go for fishing. So what will be your approach? Your approach will be either you will go with a fishing rod or you will go with a net, fishing net. The person who will go with a fishing rod is very determined. It is called hypothesis-driven strategy because he is very clear in his mind that he is going to catch only the big fishes. The person who is going with the fishing net, okay, So he's not determined. He doesn't have any hypothesis. Okay. So he wants to catch all different kinds of fishes, smaller, bigger. Along with fish, the problem is that he will also collect some planktons. Okay. So this is the crude example. Now, first one, the person who is going with a fishing rod, it is called candidate gene study. What happens in candidate gene association study? For example, if I tell you, okay, do research on thalassemia or do research on depression. Okay, thalassemia is a disease of blood. So the first hypothesis should be, you should check the gene that control or that is associated with the function of the hemoglobin. Or if you talk about depression, depression is a disease of the central nervous system. Then you will think, okay, I need to check the gene of neurotransmitter system. So that is called candidate gene association. At a time, you study a single gene. Now, what about genomoid association study? You study the whole genome at a time, and you do not have any hypothesis. Whatever you get, after that, you have to see it and sort it out. Just like the fishes. Now they are sorting out big fishes, small fishes, planktons, etc. Now, how do you do it? Okay, next one. In case of case control association study, for example, you take 1,000 individuals who is suffering from depression, and you take 1,000 healthy individuals. They don't have any disease. Now, for example, if I talk about dopamine receptor or dopamine transporter, okay, if you find a mutation or change in dopamine receptor out of 1,000 patients suffering from depression, you find in 900 people, they are having a mutation in dopamine receptor gene or transporter gene. Whereas in control, it is present only in 2 individuals. From this study, you can make out that a mutation or a change in dopamine receptor can play pathogenic role in the depression. So this is called case control or candidate gene association study. The next one is genomoid association study. Here you don't know, okay, if you have money, if you have a next generation sequencing platform, so you collect the entire DNA, you get the chip, okay, you hybridize your DNA with the chip and then run the assay. After running the assay, you will get hundreds and millions of different changes. Okay. For example, for a patient suffering from depression, if you perform genomoid association study, okay, after performing the study, you will come to know, okay, there are some 20,000 changes. There are some 5,000 nucleotide changes. Now, what do you do with these 20,000 nucleotide changes? You don't know. Then you have to subject them to pathway analysis. Then you have to filter them. Okay, from these 20,000, some of the changes, they will regulate immune pathway. Some of the changes will regulate neurodevelopmental pathway. So at one time, you get the global picture of the human genome. But again, it's really, really cumbersome. It's over. Now I'm switching over to intelligence. Now the biological basis of intelligence has been a contentious issue for several decades. Okay. So people used to debate that intelligence is a preconceived trait. Some people used to say it is an acquired trait. There is a school of thought, they believe that it is entirely biological. Another school of thought, they believe it is entirely environmental. Okay. And much time was spent on nature versus nurture theory of intelligence. What is nature? Nature is your gene. And what is nurture? Nurture is your environment, upbringing, right? Now, if it is nature, if it is your gene, the question is how much? If it is nurture, okay, so I will try to answer these questions in next few minutes. Next, please. Yeah. So, before I talk about the genetic basis of intelligence, let us first define what is intelligence. Okay. Intelligence is not all about scoring high marks in your exam. Intelligence is a special ability to plan, is the ability to reason, ability to solve problems, is the ability to think abstractly, to comprehend complex ideas, to make decisions, to learn quickly, to learn from experience. So these all define intelligence. It's not simple aspect of human life. It's just not scoring good marks in exam. Okay. Now you can ask me, if someone is intelligent, okay, what are the benefits? The benefits are that Intelligence is the best predictor of educational attainment. It is the best predictor of occupational success, and it is also one of the important predictor of well-being or health. It has been shown that if someone is intelligent, then they tend to have better mental health, better physical health. They will have fewer illnesses throughout their life, and they can live longer also. Once again, it is a debatable issue. Okay. And then next you can ask me whether intelligence is fixed across your lifetime. Oh yes. Intelligence, whatever is measured at the age of 11, it highly correlates at the age of 90. So it doesn't change when you have a good score of intelligence in the beginning of your life. It remains fixed till the end of your life. Okay. The next aspect is gender and intelligence. I think all of you might have this question, whether there is a difference between male and female, whether there is a difference between boys and girls, who is more intelligent, who is less intelligent. Oh yes, there are distinct differences in the size of the brain, in the volume of the brain between male and female, between boys and girls, but there is no difference in intelligence. There are three different aspects. Okay. The first one is we'll try to understand what is the role of brain anatomy in deciding or in influencing intelligence. Then we'll talk about the cellular basis of intelligence. Then we'll talk about the genetic basis of intelligence. Okay. The first question is that, are bigger brains smarter? This theory actually, there was so much of debate during in 19th century among the Russians, among the Europeans. They used to think that if people have bigger brains, they are more intelligent. Okay. What does the recent research says? The recent research says that it is basically neuroimaging studies, the structure of the brain studied through magnetic resonance imaging, that is MRI. So multiple neuroimaging studies have been done on several thousand individuals. Okay. And it has been found that if people have bigger brain, okay, they have higher intelligence. Okay. Now the next question is that what are the different regions of the brain that are associated with higher intelligence? Okay. So research some 20 years back, okay, it was indicated that if people have bigger frontoparietal cortex, or the bigger frontal region of the brain, parietal region of the brain, or occipital region of the brain, it is associated with higher intelligence. But what does the recent research say? Next one, please. Okay. The recent research says they come up with a new hypothesis. The hypothesis is parieto-occipital, parieto-frontal integration, that is called PFIT hypothesis. So what the scientists have done, they have employed both functional imaging, that is fMRI, as well as PET. They have subjected brain to structural imaging, for example, DTI, voxel-based brain imaging, as well as magnetic resonance spectroscopy. These are structural and functional PET MRI, PET as well as fMRI. So they came to the conclusion that intelligence is actually influenced by a distributed function of the brain, multiple regions of the brain that contribute to the intelligence. It is basically a network. It is not restricted to a particular region of the brain like frontal region, temporal region, or occipital region. Prefrontal cortex, the inferior or superior lobe of parietal cortex, occipital lobes, as well as temporal lobes. It forms a network. So intelligence is actually contributed by a network involving different regions of the brain. Next one. So this is all about the structural, the role of the anatomy of the brain in contributing to intelligence. The next intriguing feature of the brain is synaptic plasticity. Your brain is plastic. Okay. What is plasticity? Plasticity is the ability of the brain to adapt to the new environment or to learn new things. Okay. Now, what is this plasticity, synaptic plasticity? We have approximately 86 billions of neurons. These neurons actually talk to each other. Okay. So how they talk to each other? So they talk to each other through neurotransmitter or through electrical impulses. Okay, so they talk through the synapses. The synapse is the region or is the junction between two neurons. Okay, so when neurons talk, or when neurons talk, if they shout, the synapses become stronger. Okay, if neurons they just whisper, the synapses remain weak. Okay, now what is more interesting is that, next one please, next one. Yeah, okay. Okay, so look at this picture. It is a Facebook concept. Okay, when a baby is born, in the newborn babies, by the age of 3 months or 6 months, okay, so they have each and every synapses. Okay, by the time they become 2 years, it is about 15,000 synapses. For example, when you join a Facebook, no, then you have almost like 50 friends. Okay, after a few years, you have like 2,000 friends. So similarly, when a baby is born, they have 2,500 synapses per neuron. When they become 2 years, they have 15,000. Now, after a few years, you realize that some of your Facebook friends, they are not talking to you, they are not exchanging, they are not posting comments on your pictures. So you feel that they are not relevant, they are not useful. So you try to remove them, right? The same concept is applied here also. So by the time they reach 4 years, kids, or 6 years, these synapses have to be trimmed. Okay, why the synapses have to be trimmed? When they are young, 6 months or 2 years old, they are flooded with information. They do not know which information to be used. Okay, by that time, 4 years or 6 years, they know how to filter the information. Okay, they start to use their neurons. Okay, so use neurons means your neurons start to talk to each other. Okay, the neuron which frequently talk to each other, they will be retained, or they will be retained, and the neurons which do not talk to each other, they will not be retained. So the principle is use it or lose it. If you use your synapses, it will be retained. If you don't use your synapses, it will be lost. Okay, so practically you do not need that many number of synapses when you grow up. So the synapses have to be trimmed. It is trimming of the tree. Now you can ask me a question that if you trim the tree, are you going to lose some information? Ideally, no. Well, if you look at a PhD thesis or a dissertation or a project report of 500 pages, on the basis of the information that is embodied in 500 pages, you can write 1,000 word abstracts or 500 word abstract. So if you go through the abstract, so you come to know the content of the thesis. So ideally, you do not lose anything, okay? But if the trimming is excessive, look at the tree, the last picture, the trimming is very excessive. Then what happens? If trimming is very excessive, then definitely it will lead to some diseases. It can lead to many neuropsychiatric diseases, including schizophrenia. So this is called synaptic plasticity. Now the question is that who does this, okay? So there is, apart from your neurons in the brain, there are glial cells, okay? So astroglia that acts as caretaker of the brain. There is one more cell that is called microglia that acts as gardener of the brain. So this is the gardener of the brain which trims the unnecessary branches of the tree or unnecessary branches of the neurons, okay? So these microglia cells, they actually take surveillance of the whole neurons. They look for appropriate connections. If the strength of the connection of the synapses is very strong, they don't remove. If the connections are weak, they remove. So by this way, the gardener of the brain or microglia participates in synaptic pruning. This synaptic pruning starts by the age of 4 or 5, and it continues up to 11 or 12 years age. Next, please. Okay, so this is the, now let us talk about the cellular basis of intelligence, okay? The action which is generated basically to manage intelligence or to kind of influence intelligence, it is basically the action of the neurons. Okay. Now the question is, if neurons are bigger or if the neurons have superior potential or if they work faster, it can lead to better intelligence. Yes. So the neurons are bigger, for example, pyramidal neurons, they are multipolar neurons present in the different function of the different regions of the brain, like hippocampus, frontal cortex, okay? So if you have many pyramidal neurons, if they are bigger, so people have been found to be associated with higher intelligence. So this is the second aspect, that is cellular basis of intelligence. Next one is the genetic basis of intelligence, okay? So the first aspect is heritability. I think almost 99% of the student, they get confused between heredity and heritability. Heredity is something different, that is the transmission of the characters across generation. And heritability, the impact of genes on a characteristic, okay? So whatever phenotypic variation you see in a population, if these are contributed by genes, then you have to calculate the percentage. So I'll just give you one crude example. So there is a father-son duo, okay? The father and the son look almost same. So if they look almost same, if they are similar, we say they have high heritability. Means the genetic contribution is more. If they look different, we say they have low heritability. That means genetic contribution to the phenotype is very, very less. Now, from where you get this heritability concept, you have to perform twin and family studies or adoption studies, as I explained earlier, to get this estimate. Okay. Now you can ask me whether this heritability is a fixed phenomena, is a stable phenomena, or it increases during your lifespan. Whatever heritability you find during childhood, so there was one study on 11,000 pairs of twins at the age of 9 was 41%. By the time they became 12 years old, it was 55%. By the time they became adult, young adult, like 17, 18 years old, the heritability increased to 66%. Now you can ask me, what is the reason for this? The reason is that the genes are same, the genes which will influence the intelligence will remain same throughout your lifespan. It is the environment which will make significant impact on the function of your gene. So that's why when you grow, okay, from 9 to 12 years age, you try to modify the environment, you try to interact with the environment. So that is due to environmental impact. Okay, so the heritability concept should be very, very clear. It is basically the contribution of genes to variation of the phenotype in a population. It is not heredity. It's not the transmission of the characteristic from one generation to the another generation. Now, if you ask me, from the population study, from the twins and adoption study, what was the estimate for human intelligence? So this means to say that intelligence is contributed by genes and the range is 50 to 80%. That means in human intelligence is substantially influenced by genes. Next one, please. Yeah. So in the beginning, I mentioned, not in the beginning, in the middle, I mentioned that you have to go for twin and adoption studies to get an estimate about the impact of genes on any characteristics. So people have done monozygotic twins, dizygotic twins, and adoption studies on human intelligence, on human studies. Okay. So what they found? Okay. As I mentioned, monozygotic twins, the first one, they have 100% genetic similarity. Okay. The dizygotic twins, they have 50% genetic similarity. Okay. So in case of first one, that is 100% genetic similarity in monozygotic twins. Monozygotic twins, when they are reared together, it was found that the score of was similar by 86%. Okay. The monozygotic twins, when they were reared apart, the score was between the two members of the pair of twins, it was 72%. So reared together and reared apart, there is a difference of almost 14%. So these difference you can contribute to the environment. Okay. Besides this, you can say in this 12 study, at least 70% genetic contribution is there to the intelligence. Now, if you talk about the adopted siblings, they are reared together, it is about 0.32%. So you can make out in case of adoptive siblings or adoptive parents who do not have genetic contribution, so there the influence is very, very less. It's less than 50%. Okay. So the studies from twin and adoption designs say that the heritability of intelligence is quite high. That means genetic contribution to intelligence range from 70 to 86%. Okay, next one. Study, as I mentioned earlier, you have to go for linkage study first. There were several linkage studies and they identified several regions from different chromosomes. For example, the red mark is there. In chromosome number 2, this region was associated with intelligence. This region was associated with intelligence. This region was associated with intelligence. But these studies did not make much impact on understanding the genetic architecture of human intelligence. Okay, the second aspect was candidate gene association studies. There were a few candidate gene association studies, like the studies were conducted on that SNAP synaptosomal protein 25 gene. It was conducted on CHRM2, that is cholinergic receptor gene, then also DNA methyltransferase gene. And they have also found some association, but these associations were not consistent. So the message from linkage study and from case control candidate gene association study were not very, very encouraging. Okay, next one. Then people thought it is better to go for whole genome association studies. Several studies, I think close to some 6-7 studies, whole genome association studies have been done for intelligence. I'm not going to list out all those studies conducted on intelligence. I'm just mentioning 2 significant landmark studies on human intelligence. The first study was conducted on 248,000, almost 250,000 individuals, the kids, okay, and it was found that as many as 538 genes are associated with human intelligence. Another study was done on approximately 270,000 individuals, and they found that almost more than 1,000 genes were associated with human intelligence. If you look at this picture, okay, you just see these are the number of the chromosome. You see that from gene representing each and every chromosomes were found to be associated with human intelligence. Okay, now the question is that you have, I mean, in a gap of just 1 year, this study 2019, this study 2018, you see such drastic difference in the number of genes associated with human intelligence. It is almost double. Okay, now you can ask me the question, okay, we have 20,000 genes. From this 20,000 genes, 1,000 genes is associated with human intelligence. How it is possible? Okay, the question is here that all these genes which have been found to be associated with intelligence, they only confer small effect. Okay, each and every gene do not make huge contribution or major contribution to the intelligence. They only confer small effect. As I mentioned, in case of complex genetic disorders, okay, that they do not cause the disease, they only influence. The same concept applies here also. So they only, okay, enhance, they only contribute to the characteristic. They really do not contribute. They really do not. I mean, there is not even a single gene that you can mention that it has major role in human intelligence. There are hundreds of genes, and those hundreds of genes, they make small impact on human intelligence. Next, please. Then the question is that how to calculate? Because from twin and adoption studies, the people have told that genetic contribution is 50 to 80%. Okay, that contribution is estimated based on phenotypes. Okay, we need to substantiate that hypothesis based on objective parameters, based on empirical evidence. So scientists, they came up with a new concept that is called polygenic risk score. So what is this? This is a computer-based algorithm. Okay, it is very difficult to estimate the risk conferred or the effect conferred by each and every gene. Okay, then they have developed a computer program where you can put all these genes and can calculate the total risk. Okay, so it was found that from GWAS study, that is genomoid association studies, this 25% heritability is contributed by gene. So this means to say that the findings from genome studies suggest that intelligence for the intelligence characteristic is contributed by only by 25%. Intelligence has only 25% genetic contribution, whereas from twin study it is 50 to 80%. So there is a huge gap. When they try to calculate the polygenic risk score, it becomes even much lesser. It is 10%. So only 10% contribution is there to human intelligence. How it is possible, right? So the concept is missing heritability. So it is 50 to 80% from twin or adoption study, and from genetic studies, it is only 25%. See here, SNP, as I mentioned earlier, single nucleotide polymorphism, what we study in genome-wide association analysis, so it contributes only 25%. And this polygenic risk score, it is only 10%. So there is a huge difference, okay? So the question is that there was one more study. That study adopts a different approach that is called genome-wide complex state analysis. There they found the genetic influence is 66%. We'll try to resolve this issue later. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so you can ask me now, the genes which they found, that 500 genes or 1000 genes, what they do actually. So these, basically this gene, they regulate the expression of they regulate were found to be involved in human intelligence or contribute to human intelligence. Okay, they were found to be expressed in pyramidal neurons, in mainly the somatosensory cortex regions or hippocampal regions. And this gene, if you look at their function, they regulate neurogenesis, they regulate neuron differentiation, and they regulate synapse structure or synaptic plasticity. So basically, whatever genes were found to be associated with human intelligence, they regulate brain-related processes, starting from neurogenesis. Neurogenesis is like formation of new neurons, differentiation of the neurons, and synaptic plasticity, which I was talking about. That synaptic plasticity is the principal mechanism of information storage and memory. Okay, next one. Then what is the paradox of intelligence? Okay, I think by now you all are very confused. I said from twin and adoption study, the genetic contribution is 50 to 80%. And from genetic studies, I say it is only 25%. And I say there is a concept of missing heritability. Okay, what is this basically? Okay, the factors which can contribute to this missing heritability is like overestimation of heritability. When you perform twin studies or adoption studies, there you make an overestimation. Okay, or otherwise, when you conduct genome-wide association study, you underestimate the effects of alleles. So missing heritability can be contributed by these two factors. Okay, the third contributor can be yet to be identified common and rare variables. Okay, as I mentioned, that Human Genome Project was completed by 2007, but it is surprising to know that even in 2021, the Human Genome Project has not been completed, because we have 8% of the genome. 8% of the genome has got highly repetitive sequences, and it is extremely difficult to sequence that 8% genomic sequences. So the scientists earlier who claimed by 2007 or 10 that they have completed the entire draft of the human genome, it is not true. Okay, there was a study in the beginning of this year from US. They found 58 new genes, and this gene mainly represent the repetitive DNA sequences. So that is the problem. So there will be many common on rare alleles, which I think not yet identified. So it also can contribute to missing heritability. The most important aspect is that gene environmental interaction. The study, it is very difficult to to perform such a controlled experiment. So we need to consider gene environmental interaction and then gene-gene interaction. Okay. So what is gene-gene interaction? For example, if you have a similar type of gene, these three genes, if they do not interact, okay, the phenotype will be like this. I am just giving one good example. If the gene interact with each other, that they can have significant impact on the phenotype. So I think same thing happens here. Okay. So they have identified like 500 to 1000 genes responsible for human intelligence. So basically these genes will have strong gene-gene interaction. Okay. The next aspect is that when you predict heritability based on twins and other studies, I think people do not consider many things like the impact of culture, the impact of environment. Okay. The people also do not take into consideration the genetic background. So predicting heritability is really, really risky. It doesn't give you the correct measure. Okay. The next one. So what is gene-gene interaction? Look at this picture. Okay. I'm talking about 20 genes. Out of these 20 genes in 1992, I'm just giving you one example how gene interaction happens. In 1992, out of these 20, only 7 genes interacted, and the level of interaction was only 11. By 1997, they identified 19, and the level of interaction increased to 62. So by 2017, the level of interaction amongst these 20 239. So how do you do this, right? In 1992, I think that time we didn't know the function of each and every gene properly and how they interact with each other. Now with the advent of all these computer programs, we can, because we can't really do experiment on human at the genetic level to understand this interaction. We have to take proteomic, genomic, transcriptomic information from different studies. We have to subject those information to the computer software, and they will give you this information. So see, from 1992 to 2017, 20 genes interacted in 39 possible way. Okay, so possibly next one. So in case of human intelligence, there is higher order genetic interaction. There could be few hundred genes, but these genes will interact with each other and then ultimately influence human intelligence. Now, by this time, again, I think by now you are highly confused. Okay, I cannot leave you like this here in a confused way. So what are the take-home messages? Okay, the take-home message is that human intelligence is a polygenic trait. This means that it is influenced by many genes, maybe few hundred genes. If you ask me tell me a precise number of genes, it's not possible. Okay, because global view or the global information on different population is not available. Those studies have been a Caucasian population from US. The studies, comprehensive studies, have so far not been done on Indian or other Asian population. So, but I can say human intelligence is a polygenic trait. It is influenced by many genes, and the influence of gene is quite substantial. Okay. The next one is that human intelligence is determined by, as I mentioned in the previous slide, higher order genetic interactions. Okay. The next one is that human intelligence is determined by gene environmental interaction. In the beginning, we mentioned it is whether it is nature versus nurture. No, it is not nature versus nurture. It is basically nature via nurture. So this means to say that both the components contribute to intelligence, maybe symbiotically. So one cannot work without other. Okay. The last concept is that I think all of you are waiting anxiously to ask me a very valid question, that if your parents are intelligent, whether you are going to become intelligent or not. Oh yes, if your parents are intelligent, yeah, you can become intelligent. Because there is a new concept. This new concept is called genetic nurturing. Okay, the concept is like that. Even if your parents, at least if they are not transmitted, still they can influence the upbringing of the kid. For kids, for example, these are the transmitted alleles. Transmitted alleles will have direct effect on the child, and the alleles, because each parent will only make 50% contribution. There will be many non-transmitted alleles, non-transmitted genes. They can also influence the fitness, the behavior of the kid. So it is basically genetic nurturing. It is not environmental nurturing. So if your parents are intelligent, of course, you can also be intelligent. So in nutshell, I can say that genes are your destiny. Okay, so with this, I finish my talk. Next one, please. So at the end, I say that genetically, no one is average, but at the same time, you have to remember a rolling stone gathers no moss. Thank you. Thank you for your kind patience.
Thank you, Dr. Debnath, for such a wonderful talk. It took me to my undergrad and post-graduation years of early 2000, late 2000. So now we are open to take questions. If any of the participants have any questions. feel free to come in. We have with us Professor Chaudhuri, Taposh Kumar Chaudhuri. Sir, if you have anything to say regarding today's webinar as well as our initiative, I would please request you to say a few words, sir. Sir, you can please unmute and if you can say.
Yes, yes, Manoj, there was a wonderful lecture. I thoroughly enjoyed it and collected a lot of information. So finally, you can tell that intelligence, you cannot really predict. And the last sentence, what you have told, that is, if the parents are intelligent, then of course the children will become intelligent. Again, there is a doubt, or there is a question, there is a debate, because we know that Rabindranath Tagore, the work of Rabindranath Tagore, got his 5 Nobel Prize, but don't know the name of his son. So in that case, you cannot say that the intelligence can be transmitted or nurtured genetically by the parents. If the parents are intelligent, then the children will become intelligent. Possibly, it is a very, very debatable issue, because in the society, we have found that the parents, they not even literate. And yes, it is right that it doesn't mean that an illiterate person is not intelligent. It's not correct. Intelligence is separate thing, and knowledge is separate thing. But even then, we have found that parents are nothing but their children. They become very intelligent and well established in the society. So a lot of research is need to be done further, and it's really very, very difficult thing to establish actually what is intelligent. And in one point, I will differ a little bit, like in the middle of your lecture or in the initial stage, you were talking about the total intelligence regarding the male and female. Yes, it was also very debatable, and in the whole world, a lot of research were done to exactly predict that whether the male are intelligent and the female are not. There is a little difference. What I know is that if you talk about the total intelligence, then yes, there is no difference, of course. But intelligence is not a single word. It is the accumulation of different words, actually. That means intelligence has got up several facets in the life. One of the facets is the decision. So decision-making intelligence is more in men or male, and that is, I believe. I don't know whether I'm correct or not. Monojit, please.
Yeah. So the two different issues. First one is the difference between male and female. Yeah, if you look from the psychological perspective, then people say that there is a difference between male and female. The level of intelligence differs between male and female, but then we need some objective parameter. We cannot simply say based on the ability to take a decision. So the science basically depends on objectivity. So people have done neuroimaging studies and compared the profile of intelligence between male and female. Basically, those neuroimaging studies have been done on several thousand individuals. So this conclusion was made based on the neuroimaging studies. So, but yes, of course, that is a kind of a debatable issue, because me being a genetics, I was very, very vocal towards the to talk on intelligence. I think his perspective is slightly different. So I was a little bit biased towards genetics, and I definitely told this based on significant evidences and scientific facts. This is number one. And number two, if parents are intelligent, children can be intelligent. Of course, this is a very, very new concept. I think the reference which I have given in the paper that was published in Science Journal in 2018. And yes, intelligence is a constellation of characteristics, and it is influenced and determined by many factors. As I said in the beginning, it is a multifactorial and polygenic, attribute of human life. So many factors determine if parents are intelligent, but if they do not treat their children properly, if they do not give proper nutritious food, number one, if the kids suffer from infectious diseases, if they don't study regularly in a good school, and if the level of pollutant in their surrounding is very high, so these all will affect the level of intelligence. So there are many hidden aspects. Okay, I made a very straightforward conclusion that if the parents are intelligent, the kids will be intelligent. But of course, there are many other factors which need to be taken into considerations, and those factors actually I left for discussion. Thank you. Sir.
So we have received a question from Ritika Burman from Siliguri College.
Okay.
And though this point has been touched, but since she has asked this question, it is our duty to put it to the speaker of the day. Does environment affect intelligence?
Yeah, of course. So that I mentioned during my lecture from twin and adoption studies that 50 to 80% is influenced by gene. So if you say 50 to 80% influenced by gene, then you have to say 20 to 50% is also influenced by environment. Of course. But exactly.
Another question we have received from Siliguri Model High School student. He studies in class 9, Prince Rastogi. He asks that if somebody is intelligent, why is the need to study? So he can present it to his parents that he is intelligent and I do not need to study, probably.
No, I didn't get it because I didn't get the question.
Prince Rastogi of class 9 from Siliguri Model School is asking,
okay,
if somebody is intelligent, why is the need to study? So probably he will use this answer and convince his parents that he might not need to study. He is intelligent enough to ask a very intelligent question.
As I said, that scoring high marks or failing in exams is not intelligent actually. Okay, it is the ability to solve complex issues, to comprehend the complex ideas, to learn. Okay, so learning is an integral component of intelligence. So he has to learn, he has to read. Without reading, how his learning and memory capability will develop? It's not going to happen.
So intelligent people, to paraphrase, intelligent people, if he studies or learns more, will be more intelligent.
Of course, because there are two different types of intelligence. One is fluid intelligence.
So I'm sorry, dear student, you have to study more even if you are intelligent. Thank you. So we have another question from Siliguri College student, Shubhankar.
Okay.
He is asking that many people are arrogant, but they themselves remain undisturbed. So what it has to do with any kind of genetic, is this also some genetic marker or something?
Gene is like that. I have shown that gene. I didn't tell that the way you think, the way you laugh, the way you sleep, the way you talk, everything is controlled by gene. But when I say gene, the life is a gene-centric phenomena, whether you have sweet personality, whether you have arrogant behavior, everything is controlled by gene. And of course, in combination with environment, it's not exclusively influenced by gene. Of course, environment also play important role.
So another question is that these days we are too much concerned with artificial intelligence and neglecting human intelligence. So what you have to say on this?
Yeah, I think after this lecture, you should not ask me this question. Okay. By now, you might have understood what is intelligence and what all you require to be intelligent. Okay, you require cellular, impact of cellular. Intelligence has cellular underpinning. It has anatomical underpinning. It has genetic underpinning. if you talk about the artificial intelligence, where are those? Okay, you can't. So there is no comparison between the natural human intelligence and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence can represent only one part of the total intelligence, but the natural intelligence, which is contributed by cellular changes, by anatomical changes, by gene and environmental changes, can never be compared with artificial intelligence. So there is no comparison. Basically, there is no comparison.
Now we have received another question that at many times we read different kind of news articles and science reporting that women are more keen, or women are more, probably he or she try to say that women are more expert in multitasking than men. So is
No, I didn't get
intelligence play a part in that?
No, I think there was internet issue. I didn't get your question. You have to repeat again.
Multitasking. Women are more comfortable in multitasking as compared to men. Does it has got any role with their intelligence?
The one who has, the person who has asked this question, I think he has some practical experience. But I would like to know from some research studies whether he has seen some research publication where he could find, or she could find, that women can do many work together. I don't know. I don't know. Right?
Possibly she has.
This has nothing to do with the intelligence. Actually.
No, possibly she has asked
If
the
you're
question.
intelligent, you can do many work together. It's not like that.
No, I think Manoj, possibly he or she has asked the question from the perspective that women can manage the entire household work at the same time, can do the job. So from that point of view, possibly he or she is thinking that in multitask work, women are more expert. But it is not true.
No.
It is not true. Yes.
It is very much regional question. So if you talk about the from the Western perspective, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Okay. So
Exactly. Yes, that's true.
In Western countries, male and female both. In India, because of I don't know, culture or society, females are compelled to work. Okay. But in West, it doesn't matter. There is no difference. So it is a regional question.
But multitasking work means actually the involvement of the brain work. It's not that the laborious work or the physical task.
It is male also can do multitasking. Right. I think
I myself is very good at multitasking.
Yeah, male can also do multitasking. Yes.
Me too.
We have to do a controlled study. Controlled study. Without controlled study, is very difficult to say. Based on few isolated reports, we can't make scientific conclusion.
Another very interesting question that has just come in: does intelligence has any role in controlling the pandemic, the present pandemic, probably the COVID? Some places.
Yes. If people are intelligent, then they will make wise decision. Okay, right? So of course, if you are more intelligent, then as I mentioned in the second or third slide, in the middle, in my first slide of the intelligence, if people are intelligent, they have better health outcomes. Okay, their physical, mental health are better. They suffer less from illnesses. But again, this is a debatable issue because Einstein, he was super intelligent, but towards the end of his life, or last 15-20 years, he suffered for many illnesses. But if you talk about Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, our former president, I don't think he had any major illness. So it's a debatable issue. But I think if someone is intelligent, okay, so health-wise, they are much better, both mental and physical health.
We have already surpassed our time. Now we have got a question from Mr. Gopal Das. If we identify the genes responsible for intelligence and insert them into some other organisms, will it be possible that the organism becomes intelligent as human?
No, I think you got stuck again. That because of internet issue, I could not hear the whole question.
We have got a question from Gopal Das, and this is the last question that we will be taking, as we have already surpassed the time that was allotted.
Okay. So yeah, Gopal
If we
Das,
identify the genes responsible for intelligence and insert them into some other organisms,
okay.
will it be possible that the organism become as intelligent as human?
Because I think Gopal Das is very intelligent. He has asked a very intelligent question. So, so we have not reached, because I say, intelligence is a polygenic trait, and people in a gap of 2 years, I think 1 year, one group has found linked 500 genes, and another group have linked 1,000 genes. So it becomes very easy. For example, if we talk about thalassemia, right? Only one gene is responsible. So it is very easy. 100 genes are responsible, and it is practically impossible to insert all those genes because we don't know. I say gene-gene interaction. Okay. So how to insert, few hundred genes and then study? It's impossible, practically impossible. If it is single gene, of course it is possible. I mean, he might have heard of CRISPR-Cas9 pathway gene therapy, right? So by gene therapy, only one gene can be corrected, or by CRISPR-Cas9, only one gene can be edited. In a complex disease, it's very, very difficult, where gene-gene interaction plays important role in controlling a characteristic or trait. But good question.
With that, we close our question answer session. Now, may I request our education officer, Sri Vishwajit Kundu, to deliver the vote of thanks. And before that, I would like to thank all the participants for making this event possible, particularly Dr. Manojit Debnath for accepting our request and finding out time. And with that, I thank you all, and I hand it over to our senior education officer, Sri Vishwajit Kundu. Sri Kundu, please.
Ritobrato, just one suggestion. I have given my email ID. Maybe you can type my email ID. If someone is interested, they can write to me.
Thank you. This is a very great gesture from our guest scientist for the day. So he is asking the students or the participants, if you find any questions interesting, I am just typing in the text box the email ID of our guest scientist, Dr. Manojit Debnath. Feel free to write to him if you have any question. Feel free to write to him if you have any question. You can also write to us if you find it difficult to contact him, and we will forward the same to him. Thank you. Thank you.